financial literacy is a language. We learn the language of medicine. We learn English, but
Mm.
it's a language that we all need to learn because it's universal. It's critical. How do you speak money?
Welcome to Finance for Physicians, the show where we help physicians like you use money as a tool to live a great life. I'm your host, Daniel Wren, and I've spent the last decade advising physicians on their personal finances, with the mission to help them understand that taking control of their finances now means creating a future where they can practice medicine where, when, and how long they want to.
Hey, everyone. Today, I am speaking with Dr. Bill Yount. Bill is a practicing ER physician and the host of the Catching Up to 5 podcast. In our conversation today, he shares his journey of transitioning into practice and experiencing major lifestyle creep. And we discuss how his lack of financial literacy and other major mistakes contributed to him ultimately being way behind on his financial goals and on the brink of burnout. Fortunately, he was able to change course for the better. And so we discuss how he did that and what his life looks like today. And we talk about how he is now motivated to help others that are late starters to see that it's really never too late to get started on a path to financial freedom. Bill, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you.
I'm doing great, Daniel. Thanks for having me on your show. So I understand you cater to physicians. I happen to be one, but I may not be the most educated in your audience, or at least I wasn't.
Yeah, well, you've had quite an interesting path. We were just kind of catching up before we hit record. And the interesting thing about your story that I was most intrigued about is you've made this, I don't know if it's abnormal, but very unique transition from like spender type to saver type. You've been able to figure out how to save first, spend the rest, and that was not always how it was in your career and life. And so I'm super curious about your story and how you made that transition, because I think the change part is pretty hard for a lot of people to change from, especially the direction of save first. It's obviously pretty easy to change from saver to spender, but you did it the reverse way where you changed from spender to saver. And so maybe we could start out with kind of a little bit of your backstory. I'd love it if you could share kind of how you've gotten where you are today. You have a podcast that you now run. You're financially literate. You kind of know a ton about all this personal finance stuff, but it wasn't always that way, right?
No, no. I mean, as always, it starts with your childhood mentorship, and I got no mentorship from my parents. I got no
Mm.
education at all formally about personal finance, and lived a life of that a lot of physicians lead of deprivation, forced deprivation with low salary and high desires. And I came out of residency. I'm an emergency physician. I got my first big boy paycheck, and I didn't know how to partition it, is what I say. I didn't know to save first and spend last. And I classically ended up in a paycheck to paycheck lifestyle. The new house, the new cars, leased cars, made all the big rock mistakes, traveled extensively. Fortunately, however, the best financial decision I ever made was, and your audience is going to be shocked by this, but this is back in the day when I went to med school in 88 to 92. I went to my state school, which was a great financial decision because the tuition when I first started med school was $500 a month, or not a month, but a year, or a semester. Sorry, a term.
It was cheap.
It was ultra cheap because I was in North Carolina, and it was only the cost of living that was really required to go to med school. By the time I finished med school, it was probably $1,500 a semester, and came out of it with credit card debt, but no real student loan debt, and that carried forward into residency, where even during residency, I deserved the trips to sort of decompress. I didn't necessarily live within my means, and that's started there. And so exited residency with, it doesn't seem like a lot for physicians these days, but $30,000 to $40,000 of minor student loan debt and credit card debt. And, paid that off luckily in the first few years, but got married a few years later, and I married a physician. My wife's a child psychiatrist, but one of the things that happened to us was we got caught up in the funnel of life by not knowing how to partition the paycheck. We, got married, house, cars, kids, and we had twins, and one had significant developmental issues. So we ended up focusing on that. And we always scrambled. It seemed like life was a scramble. There wasn't any sort of controlled pace to it. And then 20 years later, we woke up and realized, wait a minute, nobody's going to take care of us but us. And I woke up around 49 or 50 because of a birthday. And like a lot of late starters, which is our audience that we cater to and catching up to FI, I went down the rabbit hole that a lot of physicians go down earlier in their career because they have to understand money because of the debt burden they come out with. It's really forced. And thankful for Jim Dahle, who has completely changed the landscape for physicians and high income professionals with his white coat investor, educating physicians early on about the right way to manage money. He doesn't reach everybody, as we'll talk about, because physicians are notoriously bad with money and have targets on their back. And I've made every mistake in the book. As we were talking about, the only lecture I had in residency was from a financial services company, not to be named, I guess, that gave us one lecture on finances, and I succumbed to the salesmanship and bought whole life, bought into them as sort of an AUM advisor, and it just went from there. We probably sent his kids to college before we sent our kids to college. And, we didn't take over our own money until around 50, when I started DIYing things. And physicians are educated in how to take care of people's health, and they're not educated in how to take care of their own wealth. They learn to live a rich life if they're not careful, but they don't understand what wealth was. I mean, I didn't know until age 50 what a net worth statement was. I didn't track my expenses or budget. We saved last, as you said. We saved around tax time, and we were savers of around 8 to 10%, as best I can guess, at the time, which is virtually catastrophic. You can, retirement is 50 years away with that kind of savings rate, especially when you start late as a physician. So, yeah, made all the mistakes, but we turned it around because we had no choice. We really just had no choice.
Yeah. I'll give you all a hint listening which company he worked for. If you listen for a while, you'll know it happened to be the company I started out with. So you'll know what company he was talking about, the salesperson, AUM advisor. I'm curious, was that person that you initially worked with? Because theoretically, like the financial advisor is supposed to kind of help you with money. And so I know when I used to work in that organization, we would talk to residents and fellows, and they kind of wanted, the mentality at that time was that they kind of wanted to just hand that off. They're like, I don't want to deal with the money stuff. Like, you just deal with it. And so a lot of the people we worked with were those types. When you were working with that advisor in the industry, was there any level of value attained, or was it like taken? Because there's a lot of high commission products sold, and in a lot of ways it's worse for people.
Yeah, back then there was no value, and we did hand it off. Money was scary because I hadn't learned about it. Investing was scary. It seemed, and the services industry makes it feel like it's complex.
Yeah.
And there was nobody that took me aside when I started my first job and say, max out your 401k. Just like in The Graduate, he says plastics. If you just say one thing to somebody where they piques their interest, that okay, if I max out my 401k, I'll be fine. And you don't necessarily need to know as much, and you learn about the investing part later. And people focus on the numbers and what do I invest in, and physicians try to make it complex when it's really not complex at all. I started out complex when I took over my own portfolio, and I worked back to pretty simple, a 3-fund portfolio. It's it's really, it's simple but not easy, and we like to, as physicians, make it harder than it really
Yeah.
is, and get into sort of complex limited partnerships, syndications, and there's a place for that if you get started early and have the capital to branch out and diversify into some of these other assets. But you really don't need to.
Mhm.
A lot of physicians want to get into real estate, or they own their own business, and there's some advantages there. But I didn't. I'm an emergency physician. I'm a contracted employee, or independent contractor, and you know, my first job didn't teach me either about what
Mhm.
to do. There
Yeah,
was nowhere along the line was there anybody that said, no human resources that said this is what, and that's one of the disadvantages of being a contracted employee.
right.
Really are forced to do it on your own, and a lot of people end up with a little bit conflicted advisors that are, it's still probably 80% of the industry, if not 90% of the industry, people like yourself that are fee only and or advice only. Um, and there is a place for assets under management, as long as you know what you're getting into and know what you're paying. But you got to
Mhm.
know what you're paying for your investments. You got to know what you're paying for your advice, and you got to know what you expect to receive from project-based management, hourly-based management, which is where I recommend everybody goes.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination of factors. At the end of the day, when you mix financial literacy or financial illiteracy with a heavily conflicted service, there's going to be lots of problems emerge. But I'm curious, in the early days of your career, did you feel like you were good, or it just didn't cross your mind much as far as like your finances? It was more of like we're good, we don't need to worry about it, or what were your thoughts
Oh,
on
no,
finances?
yeah. I mean, we're rich, right? We've made it. We've gotten through all our 20s and early 30s, and now we've made it. And you live this rich life, not the millionaire next door life. It's too easy after deprivation and without education. As you say, you're prey when you're financially literate. And I don't know that med schools still do a good job of giving you a personal finance class. You don't get it in college. You're starting to get it in high schools. There's about 26 states that are required to deliver a semester-long personal finance class. Thank goodness. At least it's starting. And it should migrate up the spectrum. There are universities that require it. Paul Merriman and his Financial Education Foundation have created a whole, a model for financial education at college level with a semester required of personal finance. So it's there, it's coming, but we're still way behind.
Yeah, I remember when I started my financial planning business in 2014. So I left the industry of, sales side of the industry, and then kind of had my Jerry Maguire moment. And I was like, I got to get away from here. And I had my epiphany, and I was like, the people need uh, transparent, like low conflict financial help or advice. And so I was like, I'm going to try to go as far away from the industry as I possibly can, which is like, just write us a check, and we give you advice. So like literally like check advice, fee for service, pure fee for service. So back then it was the problem. So I did that in 2014. And the problem we had was like a lot early on, especially they're like, what do you mean I have to write a check? It was this whole lack of awareness of so low of awareness that there was not even any, it was like shock to even think that there would be costs for financial services, and financial literacy was really a lot lower then, I think, especially in the medical market with physicians, um, to where they were like, no, I'm good with my free advisor and
They're
my
not
lack
free.
of financial literacy. But
They're not free.
if you think you have a free advisor, that means you're financially illiterate. I mean
Yeah,
that.
that was me. That was me. I mean, you don't see the cost coming out of your portfolio. And
Yeah.
if you have 1%, and you've got, an AUM fee with a 1% if you're in actively managed funds, you are really hurting yourself with regards to millions of dollars that you could have if you didn't approach it more prudently from financial literacy is a language. We learn the language of medicine, we learn English, but
Mm,
it's a language that we all need to learn because it's universal. It's critical. How do you speak money?
right. Yeah, and I mean, you need to know at least the basics. You don't need to be an expert, but there's a whole lot of finance stuff. Like you start talking about investments and insurances and all that. You don't need to become an investment expert necessarily, but what we're talking about is like baseline personal finance or financial literacy. That I think should be the expectation, is that everybody has that at least foundational level of financial literacy. But as I'm saying that, like, what do you think is the foundational, what is adequate? Like, if I'm listening to this, I'm like, oh yeah, I got that. Like, how do I know I have that? Like, it's a language, but like, how do I know I'm financially literate enough?
Well, the physicians focus on the investing part, but if you look at an investor policy statement, it's comprehensive. You have to learn about insurance. You have to learn first and foremost about disability and life insurance and what are the appropriate products to be in. And I got sold disability by the same company that sold me whole life, and it's not an occupation specific policy, and I didn't know what kind of risk I was dealing with. You got to know about estate planning. You've got to know about cash flow planning. You've got to know
Mm,
about a giving plan. There's so many aspects to a financial plan. In order to speak the language, you need to know what a good financial plan or investor policy statement looks like so that when the shit hits the fan and the market does what it's done recently, you know what you're going to do. And the numbers come last. 80% of this is sort of mental, emotional, organizational. I always
mm,
tell folks to pause first, plan second, and then pivot. But a lot of people want to jump in, especially late starters, jump in and catch up by like, okay, I need to take on a lot of risk in order to get where I want to go. And well, that may not be the case.
mm,
Bitcoin isn't going to get you there. There is a standard progression for late starters that I'd like to sort of illuminate. When you wake up, there's a lot of shame, regret, remorse, anger, and you can get caught in the past, but you got to let go of the past and plant that tree that maybe should have been planted 20 years ago, because you're only going to get healthier. This is about financial health and sort of backstops. And after that, you end up in this rabbit hole thing where you dive down into it. I've got, two shelves of books behind me here that I
mm,
read because I was in analysis paralysis for probably a year, if not more, where I was too scared to take over my money because I had to know everything. I had to go through financial school, and you can read one, two, three books and know enough to speak the language. I mean, there's a few basic resources, a few basic podcasts, and for physicians that are in your practice, the White Coat Investor is a primary resource, or the Physician on Fire website is another resource. And whether it's podcasts or blogs, I mean, when I want to go to the Wikipedia of financial information, I just search White Coat Investor and whatever topic I want to learn. And there's going to be a very educated blog on that helps you say, with how do I figure out a backdoor Roth IRA? And there were things that not only did I not know a net worth statement, I didn't know anything. It's just catastrophic to think that. And I'm not the only one out there like this. I think that the average American and many, many physicians are late starters, just because America lives on pushing spending into the future with regard to accumulating debt. We're sort of debt-abetic. We're numb to it, and that's just a way of
same
life.
as-
Yeah, so it's a way of life, and we've got to do better, and the folks that wake up need to help the others that may fall behind. I think Jim publishes a survey every year that hasn't changed in years, where 25% of physicians still make it to age 60 without being millionaires. And that's just sad. That is just catastrophically sad, because you've shackled yourself to a job. And we should talk about burnout, because that is a real problem in medicine these days. I'll tell
You think the
physicians,
majority of burnout is tied to finances?
I think it's a huge part because people realize that I'm not where I need to be financially like I did, and I can't get out.
That's stuck. You're stuck to because the career is the moneymaker. I mean,
Yeah. Well, it's the debt burdens that they start with because, as Jim says, you got to live like a resident, and it's hard to do that for 3 to 5 years to pay off this massive amount of debt because you're ready not to live like a resident
mhm.
and do all the things that I did. And then I'll tell people, pay off your debt in 5 and, work for the money for another 15 to get free. And so fundamentally, if you do that starting in your early 30s, look, you're going to be by 50 retired early, 45 to 50, depending on how you do it. The journey doesn't change for late starters. It's the same journey. If you read the simple, what is it? So the shockingly simple math of early retirement by Mr. Money Mustache, Pete Adney, who we've had on our show, you can, your savings rate and the growth rate in the economy is correlated to how long it's going to take you. And we went, as we talked about before, from being single digit savers without at tax time, what was left over we saved, to rapidly within a year or so, 35 to 40% savings rate. And I was like, where the heck did all this money go? Because our lifestyle didn't really change. I mean, it was just slipping through the sieve of life. And I wasn't tracking it. It wasn't budgeting. It just didn't pay attention to where it went. And physicians are fortunate because they earn enough money that they can backwards budget. You can back into it. As long as you save what you need to save to get where you want to go and reverse engineer your financial life, you can spend the rest and enjoy it.
Is that
But
what you mean by backwards budget is
yeah,
get the savings ironed out and then kind of back into what you're able to spend and then just kind of make sure you spend at that level and then you're good?
yeah, I mean, live on half, live on 60%, save 30 to 40%, and you'll absolutely get where you want to go in about 15 years. I mean, it's a virtual certainty. And that's a backwards budget. When you're lean and you don't have a lot of money, it probably makes sense to forwards budget and watch every penny. But as soon as you get to the sort of the higher income levels, as long as you hit your number saving and max out all your accounts, your 401ks, your 403bs, your Roth IRAs, your Roth 401ks, your HSA, and you follow a pretty standard cash flow waterfall plan, and fill up your buckets, as I'm sure you've talked about on the show, it's a guarantee that within 15, 20 years, you'll be free. And if you want to still practice medicine, great. You can practice on your own terms. You can practice part-time, and you don't have to be, humping it to, make your nut, so to speak.
Let's take a quick break to talk about our firm, Renda Financial Planning. The goal of our podcast is to empower you to make better financial decisions. But sometimes the best financial decision you can make is to work with someone who understands your financial goals and has the expertise to keep you on track to reach them. That's where Ren Financial Planning comes in. We are a full-service financial planning firm that works with over 400 physicians and their families across the country. We charge a transparent monthly flat fee for our services and offer virtual meetings you can take from anywhere. Best of all, you'll get to work with a team that specializes in working with physician families. So whether you're starting out and wondering how you'll balance your student loan payments and saving for a home, or you are an established physician trying to figure out how to pay for your kids' college and how much you need to save to reach financial freedom, we can help. I'll put a link in the show notes to schedule a no obligation meeting with one of our certified financial planners. Ren Financial Planning, LLC is a registered investment advisor. For more information about our firm, please visit renfinancial.com. That's WRENNE financial.com.
Yeah, I think there's several challenges. Well, maybe the first challenge that comes to mind is like, every person I've ever talked to is like about their finances, they say the same thing. They're like, well, it doesn't feel like I spend that much. No matter, it's funny because it doesn't matter. Almost, it's pretty much independent of their income. It's like everybody says the same thing. I don't know where it all went. It doesn't feel like I spent that much. So there's got to be some level of awareness, whether it's like you were talking about, the backwards budget, which is a more high level awareness of where your money's going, or like a forward looking budget, or, counting your pennies budget. Either way, you got to have some level of awareness, because I think that's separate than financial literacy, right? So we got two things we're talking about: financial literacy and then awareness. Um, because I think I have worked with people that are very well, let's say financial planners. There's a lot of financial planners I know that are not doing very well with their personal finances.
Oh yeah, I mean it's
You
it's
know,
really interesting. You can have CEOs. There are people that can manage billions of dollars, but are
it's
bankrupt.
it's
It's
so it's that's part of it. It's simple. It's not easy. Like, it's straightforward, but it, when you put it into practice, it's much more difficult. So, um, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like, the awareness part is like, um, I feel like that comes secondary to financial literacy. Ideally, the financial literacy kind of builds into awareness, because you got to have the financial literacy first, right?
Yeah, well, in order to talk to an advisor, and I think 80% of physicians are going to work with advisors, which is good because you don't know what you don't know, and having a second set of eyes on things can really help you. So I don't discount that at all. I've been a DIYer sort of in a forced sense because I can't afford to spend on a financial advisor now, but I'm leaning towards, now that I've gotten 80% to FI, and we can talk about where I started and where I came from if you want. I don't care. I'm very transparent because
Mm.
transparency builds trust. Vulnerability builds trust. And I think that's what we're doing with our Catching Up to Fi show. First thing we did was tell our stories so that people feel safe in our community, which is large. I mean, we have 17,000 people in a Facebook community that's very active, talking about being late starter and asking their questions. And we have Bill Bengen in our community, Mr. 4%. He's there to help answer people's questions. It's really cool that we have
Yeah.
the newbies there and the seasoned veterans. And the need is incredible. Nobody talks to late starters. If you can search for it, who focuses on late starters on the financial independence journey. And I felt that, I couldn't just hold on to this information for myself. I had to reach out to people and try and help them. And it's really resonated because we are a podcast that sees 5,000 downloads for a new episode. And you don't realize what that is if you don't understand podcasts,
Yeah,
but
it's a lot.
that is a lot. We're in the top 1 to
It's like
2% of podcasts.
top 1%. Is that top
Yeah,
1%?
in the world, and we've lasted 2 years. Most podcasts only last 10 episodes,
Mhm.
and so we're reaching a big audience. We're almost at 1 million downloads in 2 years. We got this big community where people can interact. So the need is there, and we've seen exponential growth. We're trying to, through podcasts like yours, reach the people that need to find us, that aren't in the FI bubble. So I know your audience is 90% educated, but I would encourage them to say, okay, if you don't know what you're doing, and you can't actively teach somebody unless they're willing to listen. That was kind of my problem. You can't preach financial independence. You've got to, the student is ready, and the teacher will be there when they're ready. And that's true of personal finance because there's a lot of shame involved. I should know about this stuff. I'm a type A, highly educated person, but I'm illiterate, and I know what it's like to feel that you're illiterate. And as far as the rest of the journey, you get to this middle ground after the shame and the rabbit hole where you got to do the work. And we call it the boring middle, where it takes time, and you don't have the advantage as much of compounding anymore. So your savings rate has to be higher if you want to retire. I mean, for starting at 50, for me, 12 to 13-year journey had to be 40% to make it there. We didn't start from zero, and I don't know where we started, quite honestly. I know where we are now. But you get into the boring middle, and then you get close to things, and you see the end in sight. You know what your 25 times expenses number is, and your expected expenses in retirement that you've got to meet. And for physicians, it's not a small number. You get used to a more robust lifestyle. You've got to get to 3, 4, $5 million of net worth if you want to maintain your lifestyle, and potentially more, depending. I've talked to physicians, and it's really catastrophic. Dual income families, cardiologist and his wife who is a lawyer, and they have an income combined of $800,000 to $900,000. But they had a $1 million mortgage, a home equity line of credit, a couple $100,000 of credit card debt, kids that needed to go through college, and they have this ultra high income, even in the physician space, and they were broke. They were
And
absolutely
stressed
broke.
out the wazoo, probably, right?
Yeah, well, they reached out to us because they found our podcast and they actually asked for some coaching, which we were happy to provide. My co-host is a CFP. And what is it? 75% of our audience is female because there's a lot of late starting in the female population with divorce and financial trauma. And we are victims of our own financial trauma. Heck, I didn't want to deal with taxes because my dad traumatized me with taxes. He was a physician at tax time and he got audited a couple times. So I was like,
Oh,
"Oh, I don't want to touch this."
and you're an
Because
independent contractor too, so that makes it even
yeah.
more
Well,
intimidating.
we have a tax preparer. I wouldn't call him a financial planner, but we've done well from a tax standpoint. And independent contractor allows you to do a lot of certain things, and that's how we have a high savings rate is because we have accounts available to us that W-2 employees wouldn't necessarily have, and amounts that add up. So thankfully, yeah, we can shovel a lot into, and we have about a $500,000 income net of my wife's overhead, and we save, 225,000 a year.
Mhm.
It's enabled us to go from under $1 million of net worth to, about 4.3 now, in 9, 10 years. And we're 80% of the way there. The point is, you can do this. We want to get people to start at least by 50 so they can retire at 62, 63, which is the average retirement age. And it's hard because you want to have your financial wealth not necessarily cross over your burnout ratio. There's a crossover point where you're really struggling to, get to where you want to go because you have to work longer than, say, some of your colleagues that got it right. There's a lot of FOMO in the 50s where you see people who started in their 30s retiring to some other life or downshifting to part-time in their 50s, and you're still working full tilt. It can be hard, and you can feel very alone. And that's one of the reasons that Catching Up to Fi has taken off, is because people were doing this together. They're not feeling alone. They realize that there's people like them that have done the same things, and we learn from each other. We call it "Let's Catch Up to Fi together."
Yeah, there's a lot of, I would say maybe the majority of people. Um, so the cardiologist that reached out to you, I'm just curious that, in that sort of situation, um, I got a ton of, I'm behind and got a kind of a lifestyle issue, I guess you could call that. What kind of suggestions, where do you start on that? Like what?
Well, I mean, one of the big things we did, and that is painful, is when you lifestyle inflate, it's easy. It's kind of like it's easy to gain weight. It's hard to take off the weight.
Yeah,
And when you have to deflate, that can be painful. I mean, we
super.
went from a 4,500 square foot house, and thankfully we became empty nesters, which made things easier. And our kids' college was paid for, so we didn't have that hung around our necks. And we downsized from that to 2,200 square feet. And we downsized all the weight of the possessions we had. We bought used cars, and at a much lower price point. We
You
paid.
went from new leases to used cars,
Yep, and paying cash for them,
and you downsized your house,
and we downsized our house. We upped our
started
savings
watching
rate.
your lifestyle.
Absolutely. And that can be very painful. And that was one of our, and that's a powerful lever that you can pull. And it unfortunately often needs to be pulled. You have to go back to living a little bit better than a resident sometimes, if you're the later you start. And that's, like I said, our lifestyle didn't change that much. And where did the money go? But we did, get to a 30, 40% savings rate with an income of $500,000 isn't so hard. It really isn't, as long as you got the other bases covered.
Yeah, so a lot of it is, it reminds me a lot of dieting and exercise. It's like you were saying, when you're overweight, um, and you have all the bad habits, like that's where you're at the hardest point, where it's the most difficult, because it's just it's just difficult. And but when you've done like a good diet for a few months, or you're in the routine, you get the habits down, then it starts to get a lot more um, attainable, reasonable. You hit your stride, and um, the front end is very intimidating and difficult. But once you hit your stride, it becomes much, I wouldn't say easier. It's still challenging, but it's manageable.
Well, we talk about the debt snowball and the debt avalanche, but there's a saving snowball, and you put one foot in front of the other. You've got this huge elephant that you've got to figure out how to eat, and you take one bite at a time,
Hmm.
and then it does escalate. It compounds. Your knowledge compounds. Ask for help. Don't just try and necessarily do it on your own. And we provide help in our community. Get a financial advisor that coaches you, guides you, teaches you, so that you're not on your own.
Hmm.
In emergency medicine, we are largely lone wolves in our field, and physicians are often used to operating in their own space, where we have to know everything, be perfectionistic, get it right, but we don't realize that there's good enough. Perfection is actually in finance probably our enemy in many ways.
Yeah, it'll set you back. There's no perfect. Perfect is we got to lower the expectations.
Exactly, exactly. I fully agree. And the message I want to get out there is it is entirely possible to catch up. You got to wake up, and then it is possible to catch up
Hmm.
in 10 to 15 years. You're not lost. And
Right.
the wake up often happens before 50. Our audience is largely 40-year-olds that have gotten to that point, and they've overcome all the financial responsibilities necessary, or they're aware of all the financial responsibilities of being a new parent, a homeowner, and you're at the point where, okay, I can now pay attention to this. And if you start at 45, you're fine.
Yeah.
You'll be done in your late 50s. So
Yeah. No problem.
don't lose hope.
Yeah, and then early on when you start making good decisions, it's very similar to dieting too. It's like you don't lose weight or get fit after a month even. You start doing the good habits, but then it still takes a while to start to see results. It's and but you got to be tracking the results too. So you kind of have to keep tabs on your personal finances, or have some level of like awareness of your finances, so that you can see that the stuff you're doing is paying off. Like the fact that you're managing your lifestyle, you should be, ideally you're tracking your net worth, so you can kind of see like the progress that you're starting to make, and then that just reinforces, like it kind of becomes its own little snowball, and you get motivation. And but it all starts on that front end. That's it's a very difficult spot to be in, on that front end, like you said, with the shame and stuff like that on top of it. It makes it even worse.
Well, there's a lost generation out there, or a silent generation, and it is the Gen Xers, because we went from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans, and I didn't get the message. Nobody said, I grew up with sort of, my dad was a state employee, there was a pension, and he saved on the side on his own. He
Right.
never talked to us about money, but that changed. That all of a sudden that changed, and I fundamentally didn't know what a 401k was growing up at all. And so we got lost. This whole generation got lost in that transition, which is one of the reasons the late starters are often Gen Xers.
One of the other things I've seen happen, let's say I've woken up kind of to this personal finance and have started to do the right things, and have awareness of my finances. One of the things I've observed with people is that because you got your career is like the generator of the income, which helps personal finances progress. They really start pushing the gas on the career pedal, and go hard on making as much money as possible. Go all in on that, or even side gigs, or like real estate, or they basically put more emphasis on their wealth generation, we'll call it, in order to accelerate all the other stuff they've now gotten like excited about. And so it's almost like they flip-flop and start to have problems because they are all in on or have overcommitted on because that all takes time, and mental capacity.
Well, there are extra jobs. I mean, a side gig is an extra job. Real estate is not passive. Largely, it's an extra job. Running
Despite that
a
it's
business
advertised that way.
is an extra job. And I'm all about trying to lead a balanced life. You can't, you've got to be present in the moment. You can't let your past, weigh you down. And we always push things off to the future. That was, I see people that come into the ER that are like, okay, I just retired. I'm in my 60s. I'm entering my golden years. They come into the ER and I get to diagnose them with metastatic cancer. You can't push it off. You've got to live life as it goes. That's why living on half an income, living on, 60, 70% allows you to live life in the present, make the memories that people talk about and the experiences, and not necessarily accumulate the stuff. That's probably where all my money went, was accumulating stuff.
Right.
That just weighs you down and doesn't really bring you happiness. We're on the hedonic treadmill, the rat race, and there's something known as hedonic adaptation, where great, the new car feels good, the new car smell lasts a week or two till your kid vomits in the car, and then it's no longer a new car, and it doesn't. It's a thing to get you from place to place, and there's a reason why the physicians that drive Toyotas and Hondas are the millionaires next door. Honestly, you can tell who is rich but not wealthy often by the physician parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a good indicator. You'd mentioned slow-fi. I'd love it if you could kind of break down what slow-fi is. I like the sound of it.
Well, yeah, I mean it's again leading the balanced life. You talked about people frugaling down, hitting it hard with all these jobs and wealth generation, but to what point?
Right. What's the
What
point?
are the goals? What are their values? What do they don't have any time to spend any money, but it's very easy for your lifestyle to inflate as your income inflates. Unless of course you're so busy that you're burning out fast and you can't spend it. So for me, even though I'm a late starter, I downshifted my work to sort of roughly a point 0.8 because I couldn't, run fast on that treadmill anymore because there was a physical limitation, fatigue, and you've got to recognize that as you age, your capability to do nights, weekends, holidays diminishes. There is definitely a law of diminishing returns, and it's going to be harder, and you want to plan for that. That's why it's hard to get people to reverse engineer their lives. People who are financially savvy, make an exit strategy when they're starting out.
Mhm. Right. It's almost like, I don't know if the way I kind of think of it sometimes is that it's like you have a max lifetime hours that you can dedicate to your career. That's not totally accurate. Everybody's going to be different, but like it's just a kind of a way I think about it. It's like I've only got like 10,000 hours to dedicate to my career, for example, if I'm young or something. Um, how do you spread that out? And so sometimes people really just cram it in and they hit their capacity and it's like, I'm done. That to me is burnout to me is like this is not, there's probably exceptions to this, but like one reason of burnout is like I've pushed the limit on my hours and I've hit my capacity I've run too hard too soon and there's an alarm bell going off in my body that's like, chill out, dude. Like you still got a lot of time. Like let's spread this thing out a little bit instead of like crushing it.
What's the rush? I
What's
mean,
the rush?
and what are you going to do for the remainder of your life? I mean, we have a lifespan that's 80, 90 years, and we have a health span that might be less than that. And how
Well, if
do you?
you're working all the time, you're going to be you're going to be pretty immobile when you're old because you're not working out, right?
Well, yeah, again, that's balance. There's many forms of capital, and health is one of them. And we tend to not focus on our own health as physicians. Uh, so, we'll focus on the medicine, not the finance. But what about social capital? What about emotional capital? What about community capital? It's capital is not just financial capital.
Mhm. But I think having a different perspective on finances or mindset around finances, it's not, we got to get away from the consumer mentality. Like, let's just, when you're a consumer, you just spend it. And, so then you get used to it and then income goes up and then you're spending more and
We
you're like,
grow
how
up.
did I get there?
We grow up in that society.
That's the culture where we're in.
That's one of the problems. There's systemic issues that we're fighting against. Debt is normal, consumption is normal, and we have to, and it creates habits. And we talked about habits earlier. You build on these habits, and these habits can, compound against you, or they can compound for you.
Right. It's like I got all this stuff that I got to pay for. So I work 100 hours a week and I have no time left because I got to keep going on all this stuff. And then my lifespan's going to be diminished. I'm not going to be happy and my health's going to deteriorate as a result of this pursuit of all this stuff, materialism.
One of the things that physician families will do is they'll put their kids in private school. Why is that? And then they'll pay for the most expensive colleges. Well, they're again pushing off their retirement, and that's another big nut people don't talk about is, what are you doing for your kids' school? And that can, again, you're holding your retirement hostage to uh, wanting things that may not, where there's a law of diminishing returns. It may not actually change. We talk about P equals MD. I recommend to people going into medicine, if they want to go to the cheapest medical school possible, where they're going to get roughly an equivalent education, and they won't have the debt burden. You go to public school. And if you're not ready for college, go to community college. There's no shame in that. And then transfer into another college, your state school. Go to your state school like I did. And we're going to see that more and more. And those schools are becoming highly competitive, and people get it. There's, the generations now, Gen Z, Gen Y, they're all more focused on lifestyle. I don't want what the boomers and the Gen Xers did or had to do. I don't want that. I want more balance. I want a slower approach to life. And physicians have the problem of, well, what am I going to do when I'm done with medicine? One of the things that sort of causes burnout is, we're genetically entwined with being a physician as part of our identity.
Yeah.
And your identity is so much bigger than that. What are your hobbies? What are you going to do when you exit the building? I've seen physicians uh, retire in their 60s, become alcoholics, and die of liver failure. I mean, it's a real issue.
Yeah. And you got to work on that before you retire.
Oh yeah, the transition starts 3 to 5 years before you retire, for sure. I mean, you're always retiring as you're working. You're working towards that. It's like a seesaw. It's a fulcrum,
Yeah.
where you get to the tipping point, and great, you're running downhill, and but where are you running to, right?
Right. I like to think of like a nice vacation as like a taste of retirement. And it's like, if you're working all the time, not taking any vacations, you're not even close. You don't have to like wait till you're 65 to retire. Like you could be 40, 45, 50, 55 and take more vacations than you were the year before. And you're getting a little bit more of a taste of retirement.
Yeah, one of the problems is that we can't really take mini retirements often for a month, 2 months, 3 months at a time because of skill-oriented things and people worried about gaps in their employment. I mean, hopefully you have an employer or leader that is willing to negotiate these things with you. But since we're very, highly intellectual and skill-oriented profession, we can't do what, say, white-collar workers can do, and a lot of us can't work remotely. If my butt isn't in the chair, I'm not earning any money. I don't
Yep.
have a business that is generating other streams of income. And then, as people often say, you need multiple streams of income. I'm fortunate that my wife works and works full time. She's like a built-in disability policy for me. If I were to stop working, and there's something known as Wi-Fi, where she wants to work longer because she loves her job, and I've been ready for a while to exit the building, and I'm planning on, working till I'm about 62, 63. And, God love her that she's willing to work longer, because that helps us, make FI. And you can't forget, as a late starter, also Social Security. It's a backstop that people often don't factor in. It's going to be there in one form or another. And
Right.
it's an annuity that is inflation adjusted, that's going to make a huge difference in taking care of not an insignificant portion of your expenses. So don't forget that as a late starter.
Yeah, and it's it's bigger than I think people realize. At least the projected benefits at this point they're not tiny. I mean, it's a pretty substantial pension. So
And they got to learn how to manage it just like anything else.
yeah, I don't like the projections of it, like the fact that it's gonna have problems in a few years. But that doesn't mean it's gonna blow up. It just means they have some issues to deal with.
Well, like anything, there's strategy around it. There's a great calculator online called OpenSocialSecurity.com where, okay, what's the strategy in a two-income family? Who takes it first? When do they take it? Who waits until 70, especially in partnerships? What do you do if you're single? It's not a, started at 62 decision. There's, because I'm gasping, you want to, as a physician and a high-income earner, because of longevity in life, have the high income earner wait till they're 70. There's so many nuances to financial decisions that you have to educate yourself about. That's why it's good to have a second set of eyes on things like yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and your group as well. And I know the podcast has been a fun experience of getting out education that's important to people. And that's what you're doing as well. Catching up to Fi is your podcast.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would encourage people to listen to your show who are educated, again, to share it with people. Jump in anywhere. The content's relatively evergreen. There's, we call it a mindset, money, and life show. If 80% of it's mindset, we'll go into the technical aspects and talk about things like risk parity portfolios,
Mm.
complex portfolios, and how do you work a 72T tax SEPP plan. If you don't know what that is, it's, hopefully I'm piquing your interest, because that's a tool you can use to retire earlier. So we'll do the technical stuff, but we'll do a lot of mindset stuff. And then we talk about life, because we talked earlier about registered life planners. And what people don't realize is it's not, you don't want a financial planner just to manage your numbers. They want to help you realize your dreams. And in many ways, they're financial therapists, because we all have our own baggage that we bring to money, and you have to unpack that baggage to unpack why do you have the habits you do, and how do we reorganize those habits into healthier habits so
Mm.
that, you can, retire early or buy that second home without having it as a burden on the beach. You can do all these things as long as you assess your priorities. And people don't necessarily focus on what are my priorities. What is my money supposed to do? It's a tool that helps me realize a robust life.
Right. Yeah, it's a tool. It's not, net worth is not really, I mean, it's an important metric to track, for example, to see how you're progressing. But the question is, progressing to what? Progressing to more net worth in itself doesn't do anything for you.
Yeah, and but you reach your number, you can retire. Then what? Right. For
Right.
me, it's going to be podcasting. I see no end for this. I mean, and I probably will take better care of my health when I'm not working than I am now, and hopefully improve my habits there. And I will travel more with my wife and see my kids and be a grandparent, hopefully someday. You want to have time for these things, and you want to have the health in order to be able to do these things. And money without health is not well.
Right. Yep. Yep. You got to think about all of it. Well, Bill, it's been fun catching up with you. I've appreciated you coming on, and make sure y'all listening and check out Bill's podcast. And especially if you're later in your career. And I know that's the focus area for your group.
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to me personally at bill@catchinguptofi.com. I love meeting new people. I love chatting about this stuff. I just, that's the best part about this financial literacy space.
Mhm.
As an adult, it's, say, harder to make adult friends physically. And it's, how do we live longer? We have community. That's the
Correct.
number one thing, is to have a well built out community, a network. And I'd say 80 to 90% of my friends are in the financial literacy space. I see them virtually. I go to conferences like
FinCon.
Bogleheads, FinCon, Economy is a conference, and I see them every year. They become real friends in real life. I mean, I've seen my co-host of the show 6 times in the last 6 months because of the conferences we've gone to and our proximity.
Yeah.
So, isolation when you retire is a real deal.
Yes.
And that's where depression comes from. And there's a significant problem with depression as people retire. And I would say even more so for physicians, because of this sort of being wrapped up in their world. And then it's just like when your kids finish school, and a lot of your friends were school-based on their friends and parents of them. When you finish work, and when I walk out the door for my last shift, I'm going to be forgotten the next day.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to carry necessarily my work friends forward. So it's just like exercising your body. You've got to exercise your relationships, if I may say so.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of those things. You gotta keep up the exercise. You gotta hit the gym. You gotta text your buddy happy birthday, or you gotta keep up with your friends. It's not it doesn't happen by default.
Yeah, we've made new friends here today. I've gotten to meet you. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show. It isn't just about my story. It's about, using my story to reach others. And I hope we've done so today.
Yeah, I think we have. I appreciate it, Bill.
All right. Well, we'll see each other hopefully soon and meet you in real life.
No guests or clients appearing on the podcast received any form of compensation for their appearance and obtained no other benefit from us. It should not be assumed that every client has had the same experience.